This is our new Slat HSCD200 chain disc controller. It is designed to operate a chain feeding system controlling the chain disc drive motor, auger motor, and feed drop mechanism. The controller touchscreen makes it easy to set up, operate, and review status and runtime history. Versatile operation modes allow the controller to operate many different farm applications, such as a finishing house using continuous feeding mode or time-scheduled feeding along with dump control outputs. On-screen information aids in the setup, while a convenient USB port allows for quick importing and exporting of settings as well as exporting runtime history. The home screen is basically the status screen showing the mode which the controller is in, the actual status of the controller, in this case is in standby, the chain disc drive unit current, feed sensor status, currently is detecting no feed, the auger status, whether off or on, and if there's a delay present, the feed dump, this would typically indicate when the next feed dump is scheduled to occur, and then the last runtime. It features a one-touch language button to toggle between Spanish and English. And only available in the time feeding mode is a feed now button. When pressed, the controller will start the feed cycle immediately. And once that feed cycle has complete, the next automatically programmed feed cycle will begin without the need to switch in the controller back to automatic mode. Icon-driven menus allows for quick access to operation modes, system, history, the settings, and programming the timed feeding schedules. Operating modes include manual, continuous feeding, timed feeding, and available in the manual mode only is a manual feed auger, which allows the running of just the auger to fill up a feed cart as an example. The washdown cycle is a feature that runs the chain disc system without running the auger motor. It's meant to run the system dry, such that during the washdown of the house, you can keep corners and piping dry during the washdown. This cycle runs 15 minutes on, 15 minutes off, and will last for 4 hours. System menu allows for the importing and exporting of settings, setting the time and date, selection between 12 and 24-hour clock, enabling or disabling password protection, and also offer the factory reset to reset all the parameters and history. History has a runtime history of up to 60 days. 7 pages worth of information can be toggled back and forth. Each include the date, how long the system is run that particular day, the number of cycles, and if there are any faults that have occurred in terms of chain disc, safety, or maximum runtime, that would be displayed also. This is also exportable to a USB drive. In the settings menu, there's 3 pages where you set up the maximum amp draw of the chain disc drive unit, the window amps, critical amps, maximum runtime, feed delay, and further information details relative to the type of the feed sensor delay, the auger delay, the shutdown delay, dump delay if dumps are being used, and how long you allow the actuator to open during the dump cycle. Other features such as the feed sensor type, the feed sensor location, the function of the toggle switch, selection yes or no of the feed dumps, the type of feed dump, whether a security switch is being used in order to ensure that the dump is closed before the feed cycle begins, the type of security switch, and whether you will use cleaned up mode. Each of these have a setup button which toggles you to a screen that explains each one of the settings. They'll also give you calculations based on a particular length of system to help set up the particular delays that are used and the type of barn that's being used. Timed feeding. When timed feeding is selected in the operating mode, here is where you're able to program at what point the start time, and if dumps are being used, the time of day the dump will actually be activated. You can program up to 12 cycles per day with 4 different profiles available. For example, this is profile 1. It's set to start a feed cycle at 7 a.m. and dump at 7:30 a.m. The next cycle will be 7 p.m., dumping at 7:30 p.m. Different profiles allow you to run different programs, different number of cycles, even down up to 12 per day, or just one or no dump or with dump. Access to the inside of the enclosure via two screws on the side that just requires loosening. We have the USB port where you would put your thumb drive to import and export your data. Convenient connection points along the bottom with the room along the bottom of the enclosure for wiring to reside. Controller also features alarm outputs and trouble light output that can be connected locally. Selectable proximity switch type for use of the feed sensor, whether normally open or normally closed. The maximum runtime monitored to prevent feed spills. It features a 7-inch touchscreen display and everything's icon driven. Can be updated in the field. Therefore, if there is a program update down the road, that can be done on site. The enclosure features no metallic surfaces, waterproof equivalent to NEMA 4X. Plastic hinges, pins, all stainless steel hardware on the inside. This unit is rated for a 2-horsepower chain disc motor, intended to be mounted on the inside of a building, typically in a separate room from the animals, but it is capable of having some inadvertent water contact during washdown. Okay, now I'm going to run through a typical setup of a program for the unit. Let's say, for example, we're going to use in a SAL application, and we're going to have dumps. We'll have a feed dump. First thing we'll do is go into the settings. And being the initial setup for the first time, we'll go to the third page, which basically selects what type of feed sensor in the feed dump. Here we're going to say we have a feed sensor is normally open. It will be located in the last drop tube. The toggle switch function, we have the option of being stop or continuous. Stop means when the toggle switch is thrown, and I'll show this on the front display of all the different faults and the different functions of the front display. But when the toggle switch is in stop, that means the feed cycle stops once the toggle switch has been opened. Toggle switch may be located at the chain disc drive unit itself, or also is tied to the front door circuit of the chain drive unit, such that it will stop the system from running once the door has been removed. You can also be selected as continuous, meaning that the system will still stop, but it's basically in pause mode, and it will continue once the switch has been made again, and it will pick up where it left off. In this case, we are going to have feed dumps. You just toggle between yes or no. The type of feed dump, this in case it would be an actuator. We are going to use a security switch, indicating that the feed dump is closed. The type of security switch is selection between normally open and normally closed. And whether we want to clean dumps at the beginning of the cycle. What clean dump is basically is the dump will open and close 3 times to help get out residual food from the sow drops before it brings in new feed. So we'll select yes for that. Now we'll back up to the first page to set up the maximum amps and the operating conditions of the drive unit. These are default values as shown. 6 amps is going to be based upon the rated motor amps of the rated nameplate motor amps that you'll find on the chain disc motor. Currently is at 6 amps. That's going to be very typical of most motors that we provide in our systems. The window amps is basically the difference between the amount of current the chain disc drive motor draws in an unloaded system minus, or is the difference between that and the maximum amps. So for this example, let's say when the system is completely empty of feed, it's going to run around 4 amps. It probably would be lower than that. What's going to happen is the first time you operate the system, as long as the current is below 6 amps, the auger will bring feed into the system. And once it goes above 6 amps, the auger will stop bringing in feed, and we'll wait for the amps to drop below the difference between these two. In this case, it would be 5 amps. 6 minus 1 is 5. So once the amps drops below 5 amps, the auger will then begin bringing feed back into the system again. This regulates the load on the system to keep a maximum amount of feed in the pipes at all time while not overloading the chain disc drive motor. There is a delay associated with the maximum amp. In this case, it's 4 minutes. For any reason that the load stays above 6 for 4 minutes continuously, That would indicate that there is a fault and the system is being overloaded and it will go into fault mode. Critical amps is another fault detection. This here would indicate that there is a serious mechanical failure or a shorted motor occurrence in the chain drive unit. If it exceeds 8 amps for a time set at 10 seconds, then it will go into fault. I would not extend the time beyond 10 seconds because any longer than that, now you're running the risk of some severe damage to your motor and the system if it stays above 8 amps for an extended period of time. The maximum run time is basically another fault. It would be equal to the amount of time it takes to cycle to do one complete fill of your system plus another 10 to 15 minutes. This allows the system to fill up the system, but in case there was a feed dump or a feed bin bridge or no feed at all, the system would stop after, in this case, an hour and a half. This would prevent, running the system empty for extended periods of time or a feed spill. Feed delay is a function only in continuous running when the application may be a finishing farm. This is set for 1 hour, for example. We'll explain that when we go into the continuous feeding example. The second page sets the delays on the individual components. Feed sensor, basically this is how long the sensor will be ignored upon the first starting of the feed cycle. For example, if the feed sensor is in the chain disc pipe itself, there will be feed left over at the end of the feed cycle. This allows that feed to be pulled away and dumped out from in front of the proximity switch before it starts sensing for feed once again. 4 minutes in this example, the prox switch is ignored. Auger delay, this is the delay the chain disc system starts. This is how much time will elapse before the auger will start bringing in feed. Purpose of this is allows us to purge the system completely. This should be equivalent to the time that it takes for the system to make one complete revolution. This is calculated based on the total length of the system plus adding 2 feet per corner in the system and dividing by 122. That would equate to the number of minutes it would take to do one full revolution. This should be equal to that value plus an extra minute or two just to make sure the system is empty before bringing in more feed. Shutdown delay is once the feed cycle has ended and detects feed, the auger will shut down immediately. After that auger has shut down, this timer will begin and it delays 30 seconds. In this case, it can be changed as necessary to further run the chain disc system, not bringing in additional feed to finish topping off the last few sow drops, as for an example, but help empty the system prior to running the next feed cycle. In this example, we are using a dump and we are using an actuator as the dump. The dump delay is like a dwell time. Once the feed dump has opened, this is how long it will stay open before it closes back. In this case, it's 1 minute. The actuator open time is the amount of time you're going to send an open signal to the actuator to get it fully open. Actuator takes time to go from fully closed to fully open position, so this time would be equivalent to that. In order to change any of these times, and you see this icon beside them, you just hit the plus or the minus to change the value in which column you wish to change. The typical scale of that particular column will be visible at the top. Once all these have been set up, and again, the shortcut menu to access each one, an explanation of what these delays are, max amps, etc., what they are, can be accessed at any time from these screens. We're going to confirm we're in timed feeding mode. We're going to use, this is an example, profile 1. It has 2 feed cycles. Here you'll toggle between the number of feed cycles you will wish to have. As you increase and decrease the feed cycles, these will populate, indicating that you need to fill in the time. So we'll change this back to 2. We've got it set to start at 7 a.m. and dump at 7:30, and again at 7 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. So going back to home, and here's basically if you wish to start it now, or start your feed cycle knowing that it was, since currently it's 2:30, that it will feed at 7 p.m., then it indicates how many hours you'll wait till that time and when the next dump cycle is scheduled to dump. Let's say, for example, that you don't wish to wait till then, you want to feed now, press the Feed Now button, and your cycle will immediately start. Here's an example, the clean dump operation has begun. The dumps will open and close 3 times, and then the chain disc drive unit will turn on. Once this cycle has been complete, it then will go back into automatic mode and start the next feed cycle. Feed cycle can be stopped at any time by pressing the red illuminated stop button. Say for example, we are running this system. During any time it's running and their fault was to occur, let's say for example, we would have a chain disc fault. System immediately stops without delay the feed cycle and turns the power off to the chain disc drive motor, and it will indicate what the fault has occurred. Press the red reset button, and again it will take you a page to acknowledge it. This was a chain disc safety fault. Acknowledge the fault. Certainly will require you to reset the switch in the chain drive unit itself. The fault will go away. As I mentioned before about function of the toggle switch, for example, if the door was taken off, or the toggle switch at the chain drive motor was turned off, you would get an indication on here that the toggle switch is off, and the system would not run until that has been turned back on. Other faults include maximum runtime, no chain disc drive motor current. In fact, if we look at the list here on the acknowledgement page, these are all the potential faults that could occur. Chain disc safety, critical amps exceeded, maximum runtime exceeded, chain disc not running, or dump security switch is not closed. Okay, that would be a typical timed feeding setup. Now if we're deciding we would actually use a continuous feed setup, what continuous feed delay or continuous feeding means is that the system will run a cycle. It will typically fill up feeders within a finishing barn. The proximity switch may be located in the chain disc pipe itself, or it may be located in the last drop going to the last feeder. That decision is made in the settings, in which we'll go through. Once the feed cycle has complete and the prox sensor has detected feed, the feed cycle will end. Then it will launch this feed delay. All the default values are located in the manual, and these you can turn up and down. They will stop, and all settings are set to give you a minimum and a maximum value that should be representative of how the system should run, and not give you values well beyond something that may cause you issues. Again, with the finishing farm, the feed delay is what controls how often this works. All the other settings will be pretty much the same thing. The maximum current, window amps, all that controls the load on the system. Maximum runtime, all that's still active with whether it's time feeding or continuous feeding. In continuous feeding mode, you just set the feed delay. Same way with the auger, dump delay would not be active in the continuous feed. In fact, this information here is ignored during that time, but typically I would turn it off, but it would not be used in the continuous feed mode. Here, feed sensor in the last drop tube. This does make a difference how the feed delay is operated. If yes is selected for the feed sensor to be in the last drop tube, then the feed delay does not start until that feed has dropped away from the feed sensor. If the prox switch is in the chain pipe itself, then it starts the delay immediately. And now you notice the feed now button has gone away because it's no longer necessary, because when you hit start, your cycle begins immediately. And now we have continuous mode is running. We have the auger delay countdown, the chain disc current, and whether the feed sensor is detecting feed or not, what the auger delay is. In this case, we do not have feed dumps in the last run cycle. Now this current demonstration, it is actually still in auger delay, but if the feed sensor were to detect feed, there will be an indication here. Once the feed sense delay has ended, you will have to detect feed for 5 continuous seconds before the system recognizes that it's full, and it will start the shutdown process. You always have the option to run it in manual mode as well, which would basically give you the mode that you're in manual, and you can start and stop it just as if you were in continuous feed mode. And also in manual mode, if you wish to operate the feed dumps, select that you have feed dumps in case if you were doing some troubleshooting, and go into operating mode, manual. And since we have feed dumps now selected, the manual dump button is available, and here we can actually open and close the feed dumps manually. On the inside of the controller, Again, loosen these side screws on the side. They do not have to be removed because they are self-contained. Just quickly go through the wiring connections on the inside. To the left of the controller, we have our main contactor, where our power comes in, 230 volt single phase comes in. Output to our chain disc drive motor. One of these wires, though not shown necessarily in this demonstrator, would loop through this. Refer to the manual of how many times it may loop. It all depends on your voltage and the phase that the number of phases that you're operating. But one leg would go through this current donut out to the chain drive motor. Auger motor connections. This is simply a single pole, single throw dry contact that just closes one leg for the auger drive. Toggle switch input, proximity switch input, or also referred to as the feed sensor. The chain disc safety switch. The security switch for the dump, also referred to as the actuator switch. The dump control, which has basically open, closed, and common. Again, here is single pole, double throw, dry contact. We also have a trouble or alarm output. Is also the normally open, normally closed with a common to give us the indication to either operate an alarm, a siren of some sort. And then also just a single pole, single throw dry contact for a trouble light. Few serviceable parts are on the inside. HSCD intends to make the contactor as a serviceable item. It is bolted to the thing. Replacement plugs, replacement backboard, and replacement front door board, which basically contains the touchscreen. And then the USB port access, and also there's another SD card access, all used for programming if it were necessary to do so in the field. This lid does have a full perimeter gasket to keep it watertight. And again, all hardware is stainless to prevent corrosion.